Now we're going to go through the pistol style stunner from Jarvis. We have the standard length heavy duty stunner in front of us. Just to talk a little bit about the safety and handling of this particular tool. The Jarvis tools are designed from a safety aspect. They use what's called the rolling block safety. So when the hammer is pulled back and engaged and the firing block is pulled back and locked, if we had a live cartridge in the chamber and the trigger is pulled with the firing block in this position, the tool cannot fire. To make ready to fire, we would put a cartridge in the chamber, push forward on the firing block, and then squeeze the trigger and it would fire. To put it back in safety mode at this point, if we did not want to use the tool, we would pull back on the firing block. Another safety measure is this tool is designed as a single hand operation. The reason for that is on the pistol style tool there is an exhaust port for the hot gases. So if you should happen to use two hands and cover that port, you could injure yourself with a slight burn. It's always designed as a single use or single hand operation. We never want to have our finger near the trigger or on the trigger until we are ready to use the tool. Always keep your hand, and any other person should never be pointed at as far as the muzzle end of the tool. Should always be pointed to the ground or away from any co-workers. Never just pull the trigger to release the hammer. It is best to hold back on the hammer, squeeze the trigger, and release gently to reset the hammer. We recommend that the tool is stored with the firing block closed and the hammer closed to release the pressure that is on the release pin to make it last longer. For cleaning, daily cleaning, we'll go through the daily cleaning steps at this point. We want to remove the muzzle. Set it off to the side. We've removed the stop washer and the barrel lock washer as well. Next, we're going to remove the sleeves and bolt assembly. And please note, on any self-retracting pistol style stunner, the first sleeve and the last sleeve on the bolt assembly will take the most abuse. So as we disassemble, we're going to set those off to the side so that we note that those are the two wear parts of the sleeves. And then we're going to remove our flange washer. So these are the components with which we're going to talk about and go through the cleaning procedures on, including the barrel assembly. To start with the muzzle, we want to make sure that we use some type of a brush. We're going to brush out the inside of the muzzle, and we're going to take a clean rag and we're going to wipe it down. We can also clean the muzzle end using the brush, clean any debris off of the end of the muzzle. It's important to inspect all components, especially the bore hole. The bore hole can wear out and become oblong. It takes many shots to do that, but we do want to inspect it. We want to inspect it for any pitting, any other damage to the inside bore of the tool, and then also inspect on this end for any wear on the bore there as well. On the penetrating bolt, we want to make sure that we clean the bolt, especially the piston end. We use a green scratch pad and we just rub and clean off any excess debris, whether it's unburnt gunpowder or any other debris that builds up. We want to make sure that we have a good smooth surface all around this area, and also on the top end of the bolt. It should be good and smooth. We also use a green scratch pad to clean the stem of the bolt so we can inspect it. We want to remove any excess debris, any rust or anything, so we can inspect it for any pitting or any other damage to the stem of the bolt. Pay close attention to the bottom end of the bolt. If there's any rust buildup or any other pitting in that area, the bolt should be replaced at that point. It's also important to note that the penetrating end of the bolt is sharp on the inside edge. We should never ever use anything that removes material, any metal. So we don't want to use a grinder, we don't want to use a file, we don't want to use emery cloth, sandpaper. Anything that removes metal should never be used on the outside edge. We sharpen on the inside. The inside edge of the inside end of the bolt is also hollow at about 5/8 of an inch deep. We want to make sure that we clean any debris, if it's bone chip, whatever it might be. We want to make sure that we clean that out of the end of the bolt. The stop washer, we just want to clean it with just a clean rag so we can inspect it. The inside bore of the stop washer is typically what will wear out. It will start to wear out towards the middle and get larger. If we get excessive wear where it is halfway through the inside diameter, we would remove that and replace it with a new one. If it's cracked or split in any way, same thing, we would want to replace that particular part. The barrel lock washer is designed to cushion the end of the barrel and the inside lip of the breech or the muzzle. This will wear, it'll start to thin, it can crack, it can split. What we want to do with this, it will become dirty. We want to clean this off with a dry rag. We don't want to use any oils on this, and just inspect it. If you feel it's overly thin, we replace that particular that part, the barrel lock washer. It is important to note that if this is missing from the tool when it's in use, that you will go through the bumpers very quickly. They will break down very quickly without this placed in the tool. The flange washer, this is designed to be cleaned with just a dry rag. We don't want to use any oils or lubricants on this to clean it. The inside diameter is what will wear on the flange washer. It is designed to be the first item onto the bolt assembly, and what it does is it actually flattens out the bottom part of the bolt to lessen the damage on the sleeves. Next are the bumpers. The bumpers are a soft material. They're designed to compress. We want to clean these again with just a dry rag. We don't want to use any oils or solvents on this. Just a nice clean dry rag. The inside diameter and then around this outside edge will start to wear in towards the middle. So it will wear back this way and it'll wear into the inside. We want to make sure that if we have any sleeve that we feel is overly damaged, that we remove that sleeve and replace it with a new one. It's not necessary if a majority are in good working condition that we don't have to replace the full set. We can just go ahead and replace the bad one. Again, keeping in mind, we set aside the first on and last on, and we make sure that we rotate those to the middle as we reassemble. The next part that we're going to check and clean is on the handpiece itself, the barrel assembly. The first thing I do is just from a troubleshooting standpoint, we want to check our release pin strength. And the way we do that, we have the firing block closed and the hammer closed, and we reach over the top of the hammer and we pull back. Use pressure and pull back on the firing block. If you have any movement in the firing block, if it moves easily, we then know we have to disassemble the barrel assembly and replace the release pin spring. At this point, it is in good working condition. We're going to now clean the barrel. We're going to take our brush, and we want to brush in and out of the barrel and clean that. I was afraid of that. We want to clean that in and out like this with the brush. It is recommended if you have a drill to be able to use the drill and rotate. That rotation will clean the barrel out. We then want to take a cloth, and we want to drop the cloth in and wipe that out. There are 2 additional tools that are to be used with the pistol. This is called the undercut cleaner. And if you notice, there are 2 deviations on the edge of the undercut, right here and here. Those are designed to clean off that undercut surface. We drop it in there, and you'll notice it stops. What we want to then do is put sideways pressure on it, and we're going to rotate it 360 degrees, and we're going to scrape and clean the undercut. You can see there's an edge that we've cleaned. It's important that that is done on a regular basis. Our recommendation is if it's heavy use through the day, it should be done daily, otherwise weekly for light usage. The other tool we're going to use is the breech face cleaning tool. We're going to take that, and it will lock itself into place. And we're going to take that, and we're going to scrape the inside face of the breech just by rotation, downward pressure and rotation, and pull that back out. We can then take our rag again, and we can clean out any excess debris. Lastly, we want to clean our chamber. So we're going to take our chamber brush, and we're going to clean the chamber. Close the firing block, close the hammer. To reassemble, we're going to start with the bolt. We're going to replace the flange washer. We're going to replace our sleeves. Now we want to make sure we put first on and last on in the middle. And we're going to replace our stop washer. There's our full assembly. We will then take that, put it into the barrel. Next, we want to be sure to install the barrel lock washer and get it seated properly inside of the muzzle. And then we will assemble the muzzle onto the barrel. Hand tight is sufficient on the muzzle and barrel assembly. That's the daily cleaning procedures for the pistol style stunners. When completing your maintenance and cleaning procedures, they are the same no matter whether it's a standard length configuration or a long bolt configuration. We'll now demonstrate the removal of the trigger mechanism. We're going to use a punch and a hammer to drive the set pin, the roll pin out. We can now remove the trigger, the plunger, and the plunger spring. What we want to do is we want to inspect the trigger, clean the trigger with just a rag, a washcloth, inspect it, make sure there's no cracks. Same with the plunger. We're going to clean the plunger inspect it as well and make sure it's in good working condition. And then also on the spring, we'll just check to make sure there's no broken pieces and it's not set. The set pin or roll pin is designed to hold the assembly together on the handle. To reassemble, we're going to put the spring onto the plunger, and you'll notice inside the trigger handle there will be a hole, mounting hole, that we're going to drop the plunger into. Next, we're going to take the trigger, and notice the trigger has a dimple machined into it. We're going to take that and we're going to put that over the point of the plunger and compress. And then we're going to line up the hole of the trigger and the handle. And then we will reinsert till flush and install the trigger. We're now going to demonstrate the maintenance and cleaning of the barrel assembly, the components of the barrel assembly of the Jarvis pistol style stunner. First, we're going to remove the retention clamp. We want to note the two nuts. We're going to use a 7/16 inch wrench and we're going to loosen those. We want to turn those by hand to the end of the bolt without removing. We then want to take a hammer and pound them through. We do this so we don't damage the ends of the bolt and the threads on the end of the bolt. We'll then remove those, finish tapping them through, and remove the bolts. Next, we're going to remove the firing block pivot and the hammer pivot. Now we have our handle assembly. We're going to remove the release pin and release pin spring. And we also have now on the assembly the extractor spring and its assembly components. We use a hex wrench to remove. Please note we have locking washer, the nut, and the extractor spring. To clean, we just use a rag, a dry rag. We're going to clean this off, inspect for any cracks or anything else on the handle itself. We don't remove the handle assembly itself here unless it needs to be removed. We leave this intact on our regular cleaning and maintenance unless it needs to be removed. We then can clean the inside of the barrel assembly using a rag. Clean that up and wash the outside. We can inspect the release pin. What we're looking for here, there's two components of the release pin. We have the set pin on the end pin. We want to make sure that that is centered And if it's sheared off, we actually have to replace that as a replaceable part. We also want to inspect on this end of the release pin to make sure that it's not cracked and there's not excessive wear or damage on this inside edge here, the angled edge. We want to make sure we've got a good sharp edge with that. When looking at the release pin spring, when used with the release pin, we want to make sure that the spring covers the entire length all the way to the very end. It should not be short. If you have a release pin spring that is short by that amount of distance from the end, we would want to replace that release pin spring. And it simply should cover from the end of the flange all the way to the end of the release pin. That is a typical wear part. On the extractor spring, what is used to reset the extractor and pull the cartridge out. The typical damage to the extractor spring is this leg or this leg will break off. And at that point, you'll know the extractor is not working. You'll have to release or replace this spring. The extractor itself has the dog. The dog can break. At this point, that is a replaceable part by driving the pin out, the set pin out, putting a new pin on it, and driving that pin back. And it just should move freely, like this. Extractor, notice on the extractor you have the cutout for the chamber is here. That should mount just like that. On the hammer itself, the heavy-duty hammer, these are a very durable piece of equipment. Typically what you'll find is any of the legs could potentially break off on the hammer. At that point, it needs to be replaced. You could see wear on the pivot bore. If that has excessive wear, it's very sloppy on the pivot. The hammer should also be replaced for that purpose. With the Jarvis design tools, we look at the interlock tightness, and what we're looking at is this area right here on the Jarvis design tools. When replacing the hammer or firing block, it is not necessary to machine on those tools by filing in any way to reassemble a new hammer or firing block onto your existing tool. It should fit as a new piece immediately. To reassemble, we're going to take our handle. We want to put the extractor spring back in. I'm going to take my lock washer, put it back on my set screw as such, and we're going to start hand tight. Before we tighten this down using the tool, I want to make sure to note that the extractor extensions on this spring should be centered on the rail of the handle. So it's now centered between the rail of the handle. Next, I'm going to take my release pin. We're going to take the release pin and insert it into our area here. We're going to snap it in place and center it again between the rail. And now assemble this back through. And we're going to line up and insert our mounting bolts. Making special note on the mounting bolts, there are two flat edges on the mounting bolt here and here. those line up on the flats on our cutout. And we can use our wrench and move that into the proper position. And then tap them into place so that they are now properly mounted and flush. We then will take and put the two nuts hand tight to the surface. There and there. The next part we're going to put in is our firing block. And what we're going to do on the firing block is on the leg of the spring here. The push dog will be on top of that. And on the center part of the release pin, the extractor mount will be under that. The easiest way to do this is hold it in a downward position. Take the firing block in, place the dog on top, down and forward. The only way to tell that it's properly inserted is to take the pivot, drive it in. If it is installed correctly, when I pull back, notice the extractor here will snap forward. And that is functioning properly. To finish the assembly, we're going to take the hammer. The hammer will drop over top of the end pin and it will mount securely so everything is flush here. And then we can take our pivot, drive our pivot in. We then put our locking plate on. We may have to adjust on the nut to make sure that it's in proper position so that the angles meet up with the tabs, and it should sit flush very easily. We don't want to over tighten on the nut so it's flush, and then we're going to take and we're going to put the locking plate on and finish the assembly. We will now demonstrate how to properly load and fire the pistol style stunner. Note, it's important for all operators of captive bolt devices to wear eye protection and ear protection when using captive bolt tools. To properly load the pistol style stunner, we pull back on the hammer, pull back on the firing block to expose the chamber. We take our power load and insert it into the chamber. Always note, keep your finger away from the trigger. Keep all hands and your personal body away from the pistol or the muzzle end of the tool, and never point it at an unintended target. To fire this tool, we push forward on the firing block. It's also important to note, as a manufacturer, we never recommend air firing the captive bolt devices. We are doing this for demonstration purposes only. To fire the tool, we simply squeeze the trigger. To extract the cartridge, we pull back on the hammer, pull back on the extractor, and notice here, at this point, right here, it pulls the cartridge out and I can grab the spent cartridge. To store it, we push forward on the firing block, pull back on the hammer, squeeze the trigger, and release slowly.